Martha Reynolds grabbed her youngest daughter with both arms and screamed a sound that didn't belong to any word, raw animal, the kind of cry that lives beneath language, as the auctioneer's voice cut across the summer heat and named a price on her children. The crowd didn't flinch. Some of them laughed. One man leaned over to his neighbor and said something low, and both of them grinned at her weight, her tears, her shaking hands. She had nothing left. No money, no husband, no one coming. Just 6 children pressed against her body, and a crowd that had already decided what she was worth. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Every comment, every share, every subscriber keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. The auctioneer's name was Gerald Pruitt, and he had the kind of voice that carried easily across open ground, loud and flat, and entirely without shame. He stood on the raised platform in the center of Calhoun County's livestock yard, with a piece of paper in his hand, and read from it like he was listing cattle. Martha Reynolds, widow, 6 dependents. Labor contracts available as follows: 3 female ages 14, 11, and 4. 3 male ages 16, 13, and 9. Contracts to be awarded by highest bid. Terms negotiable. Martha stood below the platform in the full weight of the July sun and did not move. She had told herself she would not cry. She had made that promise to herself that morning while she braided her youngest daughter's hair and told the children it was going to be all right, that nobody was going to separate them, that God had not brought them this far to leave them. She had said those words with full conviction, and she had believed them, or tried to, because the alternative was a darkness so complete she couldn't let herself look directly at it. She was crying now, not loudly. She had cried loudly in the first weeks after Daniel died, and it had accomplished nothing except frightening the children and giving the neighbors something to talk about. This was a different kind of crying, quiet and steady, running down her face without permission, while she kept her chin up and her hands around little Clara's shoulders and tried to look like a woman who still had options. She didn't have options. Victor Hale had made sure of that. He stood to the right of the platform in a clean white shirt, watching her the way a man watches something he has already decided to purchase. He was tall, well-dressed, soft in the middle, but hard in the eyes, and he had the particular confidence of a man who had never once in his life been told no and believed it. He had a lawyer beside him and 2 hired men behind him, and a smile that didn't reach anything above his jaw. "Terrible thing," he said loudly enough that people near him could hear. "Terrible thing when a family falls apart like this. I always said Daniel Reynolds was a poor financial manager. No offense to the widow." Martha heard him. She turned her face forward and said nothing. Her oldest son, James, moved close to her left side. He was 16 and already broad in the shoulders, with his father's jaw and his father's way of going quiet when he was the most angry. He pressed his arm against hers. "Don't," she said very quietly. "He said Pa was—" "I heard what he said. Don't." James went still, but she could feel the tension in him like a wire pulled too tight. Her second oldest, Robert, 13 years old, and already too smart for his own comfort, stood on her right with one hand holding the collar of 9-year-old Sam, who kept trying to push forward to see over the adults in front of them. Her daughters, Eliza, 14, serious-faced and pale. Anna, 11, who had been so frightened that morning she'd been sick before breakfast. And Clara, 4 years old, and entirely unaware of what was happening, were arranged around her like a constellation, each of them touching some part of her. She counted them the way she'd been counting them for months. Over and over. 6, 6, 6. Gerald Pruitt cleared his throat and shuffled his papers. Bank of Calhoun County holds outstanding debt against the Reynolds estate in the amount of $4,216 as of this morning. Debt originated from a commercial loan co-signed by the late Daniel Reynolds and transferred upon his death. Property has been seized and sold. This auction represents the remaining settlement of outstanding balance. There was no loan, Martha said. She said it clearly, not yelling, just clearly. My husband did not take that loan. I've said it 6 times to 6 different people, and nobody has shown me the original signature. A few people in the crowd shifted. Someone toward the back said something she couldn't make out. Gerald Pruitt looked at her over his papers with the expression of a man deeply inconvenienced by accuracy. "Ma'am, the documentation has been reviewed and confirmed by the bank." "The bank that Victor Hale sits on the board of," Martha said. Silence. Not long. A few seconds. Then a low ripple of murmuring moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Victor Hale's smile did not change. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his voice carrying easily. "I understand you're upset. You've been through a tremendous amount. But accusations made in grief aren't the same as facts, and I would hate to see you embarrass yourself further in front of your children. My children are watching a man auction them like livestock," Martha said. "I don't think embarrassment is the issue anymore." Another murmur, bigger this time. Someone laughed, but it wasn't an easy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out of discomfort. Victor's smile finally changed. Just slightly. Just enough. He stepped forward toward the platform and said in a lower voice that still carried, "Let me make this simple. I'll take Martha and the 2 older boys, James and Robert. The younger 4 can go to other placements. Everyone gets housed. Everyone gets fed. This doesn't have to be uglier than it already is." Martha's arm came around Clara so fast the little girl made a small, surprised sound. "You are not separating my children." "Martha, Mrs. Reynolds." Her voice did not shake. She was surprised it didn't shake. "And you will not separate my children. You will not take my sons. You will not place my daughters with strangers. I don't care what paper you had forged, or what judge you paid, or what story you've told this town. Those are my children, and they stay with me." Victor Hale looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to Pruitt and made a small gesture with his hand. "Get on with it." The bidding started. It happened fast, and it happened the way these things always happened. Men bidding in small amounts, calling numbers without looking at the children, without looking at Martha, treating the whole business as a transaction rather than the destruction of a family. The Hendersons bid on Eliza. A factory foreman from 3 counties over bid on James. A couple Martha didn't recognize bid on Clara, and the sound that came out of Martha when she heard it was not a word, just a sound. And Clara pressed closer and said, "Mama, what's happening, Mama?" "It's all right," Martha said. And she was lying. She was absolutely lying, but she kept saying it. "It's all right, baby. It's all right." James grabbed her hand. He never grabbed her hand. He was 16 and too old and too proud for that. But he grabbed her hand now and held on hard. "Mama," he said. And that one word contained everything. The fear he'd been holding back for months. The grief he'd buried under. Silence, all of it, right there in that one word. "I know," she said. "I know, baby." The bids climbed. Numbers were called. Pruitt wrote them down. And then a voice came from the back of the crowd. Not loud, not rushed, just clear. "I'll take all of them." Everything stopped. Martha turned. She couldn't see him at first, because the crowd was thick, and the sun was directly behind him, and for one suspended moment, all she could see was a shape, tall, lean, faded hat, pulled low, standing completely still, while everyone around him turned to stare. Then the crowd shifted, and she saw him. She didn't know him. She was certain of that. She knew most of the men in this county by sight, if not by name, and this man she had never seen. He was somewhere around 30, hard to place exactly, with a face that looked like it had spent most of its years outdoors and hadn't minded. Dark eyes. A stillness to him that wasn't calm exactly. It was something more controlled than calm. Like a man who'd decided long ago not to waste motion. He walked through the crowd without touching anyone, and people moved for him without seeming to decide to. "All 7, he said again, stopping at the edge of the open space before the platform. He was looking at Pruitt, not at Martha, not at Victor. "Martha Reynolds and all 6 children. What's the total number to settle the debt?" Pruitt opened and closed his mouth. Sir, the contracts have already been... What is the number? It wasn't a question. It came out flat and quiet and final, and Pruitt found the paper and read the number, $4,216, in a voice that had lost some of its authority. The man reached into his coat. He counted out bills onto the edge of the platform. Slowly. Deliberately. Without once looking at Victor Hale. Though Victor Hale was staring at him with an expression Martha had never seen on that man's face before. Something between fury and calculation. $4,216, the man said. Count it. The yard was absolutely silent, except for the insects and the distant lowing of cattle from somewhere past the fence line. Martha was aware that she had stopped breathing. Clara was pressed against her hip, both small hands clutching Martha's skirt, and Martha could feel all 5 of the other children leaning in close, still waiting. Pruitt counted. He counted twice. Yes, that's the amount. Then we're done here, the man said. Victor Hale moved forward. Now wait just a minute. This auction is a legal proceeding, and you can't simply... The debt is settled. The man turned and looked at Victor for the first time, and something in that look made Victor take one small involuntary step back. Bank of Calhoun County holds the lien. The lien is paid. There's nothing here for you, Mr. Hale. Victor's jaw went tight. I don't know who you think you are. Cole Bennett. He said it the same way he said everything. Flat. Like it was information rather than introduction. I run the Crossfire Ranch out in the hill country. Now are we done here, or do you want to discuss this further in front of all these witnesses? Something moved through the crowd. Martha heard the name passed from one person to another in low voices, and whatever the name meant to these people, it meant something. She could see it in the way they reacted, the subtle pulling back, the looks exchanged. Victor Hale stared at Cole Bennett for a long moment. Then he straightened his jacket and stepped back. This isn't finished, he said quietly enough that only those close by could hear. No, Cole said. I don't reckon it is. He turned from Victor like the man had ceased to exist and looked at Martha for the first time. Up close, he was not remarkable. He was not the kind of man who filled a room or demanded attention by his appearance alone. The hat was weathered. The coat was plain. The boots were worn through at one heel. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting into sun, not from smiling. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, but his eyes when they met hers were direct and steady and completely without the thing she'd been watching for, from the moment he stepped forward, the thing that came into men's eyes when they did a woman a favor. That particular look that was not kindness at all, but ownership, announcing itself ahead of schedule. It wasn't there. She looked for it, and it wasn't there. Mrs. Reynolds, he said. My name is Cole Bennett. I have a ranch about 40 miles east of here. It's a working ranch, and it's a lot of work, and I'm 2 years behind on it since my last hands left. I could use people who aren't afraid of hard work. He paused. That's what I'm offering. Work and a place to stay while you figure out your next step. Nothing else. Nothing owed. Martha stared at him. James had come to stand directly at her shoulder, and she could feel him vibrating with the effort of not saying anything. Why? She said. Cole looked at her steadily. Ma'am, why? You don't know us. You spent over $4,000 on strangers. Why? Something moved across his face. It was brief. So brief she wasn't certain she'd seen it, and then it was gone, replaced by that same careful flatness. I saw what was happening, he said, and I had the money. That's not a reason. It's the reason I'm giving you today. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her children. James still coiled with anger. Robert, who was watching Cole with the particular intensity he reserved for things he was trying to understand. Eliza, who had moved between the younger 2 girls and had one arm around each of them. Sam, who was staring at Cole like he was something out of a story. And Clara, who had turned from Martha's side to look up at the stranger with absolutely no fear, which was either a good sign or a sign that 4-year-olds were simply not equipped to recognize danger. She looked at Victor Hale, who was speaking to his lawyer in a low, hard voice, without taking his eyes off her. She looked at the crowd, some of whom would not meet her gaze, and some of whom were watching this whole thing the way people watch a fire, fascinated and uninvested. "All right," she said. "Mr. Bennett." She said it like she was agreeing to a business arrangement, because that was the only way to say it and keep herself upright. Not like a woman with no options accepting the only offer left. Like a woman making a deliberate choice. Cole Bennett nodded once. He did not smile, but something in his posture shifted, a small, almost imperceptible relaxation, like a man who had been braced for something that didn't happen. "Wagons out front," he said. "Take whatever time you need." He stepped back, turned and walked toward the gate, and the crowd parted for him again, without seeming to notice they were doing it. James leaned close to Martha's ear. "Mama, we don't know this man." "I know. He spent $4,000 on us. People don't do that." "I know. So what do we do?" Martha watched Cole Bennett reach the gate and stop there, his back to the yard, his hat slightly tilted against the sun, waiting without impatience. She thought about what was behind her. The house gone, the land gone, the forged debt and the bought judge, and Victor Hale's eyes watching her from across the yard. 6 children, and nothing in her pockets, and a county that had just watched her be auctioned off and hadn't said a word. She thought about what was in front of her. A stranger's back, a wagon she hadn't seen, 40 miles of road to somewhere she'd never been. "We go," she said. She straightened her back, took Clara's hand, and walked toward the gate. Her children followed. The drive out of Calhoun County took the rest of the afternoon and well into evening, and Cole Bennett drove in the same silence he seemed to carry around him like weather. Martha sat beside him on the wagon bench with Clara half asleep in her lap. The 6 children were arranged in the bed behind them, James and Robert at the tailgate, watching the road fall away behind them, Eliza with her arms around Anna and Sam tucked close. Nobody talked for a long time. Clara was the one who broke it. "Are you a cowboy?" she asked Cole in the direct way of 4-year-olds who have not yet learned to be cautious. He glanced down at her. "Some would say so." "Do you have horses?" "About 40 of them." Clara processed this. "Can I pet them?" "If they'll let you." "Will they let me?" "Depends on the horse." Clara seemed to find this satisfying. She settled back against Martha's arm, and within 5 minutes was completely asleep, her small face turned into Martha's side. Martha looked sideways at Cole. "She doesn't warm up to people quickly," she said. "Usually?" "Kids usually know," he said. "Know what?" He was quiet for a moment. "Whether a person means them harm." Martha looked at his profile. The hard line of jaw. The even unhurried way he handled the reins. The way he kept his eyes on the road ahead. "What happened to your family?" she asked. She hadn't planned to ask it. It came out before she could decide whether it was a reasonable thing to say. He didn't react for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Lost my wife 5 years ago," he said finally. "And my son." The weight of those words settled over the wagon like the coming dark. "I'm sorry," Martha said. "So am I," he said. They didn't speak again for another hour. Behind them, Robert had moved up close to the bench and was watching Cole drive with his quiet, relentless attention. After a while he said, "Mr. Bennett." "Cole." "Cole, where'd you serve?" A pause. "Marines. Why?" "The way you stood," Robert said. "When you came through the crowd. Pa walked like that after the war, like he was always checking where all the exits were." Cole glanced back at Robert briefly. Something in his face shifted in a way Martha couldn't fully read. "Smart kid," he said. "He knows it," James said from the tailgate without heat. Robert ignored him. "Were you afraid?" he asked Cole, "when you walked up." "Robert," Martha started. "It's all right," Cole said. He thought about the question with apparent honesty. "I was angry," he said. "Not the same thing." Robert sat with that for a while. "Why were you angry?" The road curved east, and the last light of the sun stretched long and orange across the land. Cole watched the horizon before he answered. "Because some things shouldn't happen," he said. "And when they do anyway, and everybody just stands there watching, yeah? That makes me angry." Nobody said anything to that. But Martha noticed that James at the tailgate had turned from watching the road behind them and was now watching Cole Bennett instead. And the expression on her oldest son's face was not the tight, coiled wariness it had been all day. It was something else. Something cautious and unfamiliar, and very young. It was the look of a boy who had been trying for months to figure out how to be the man of the family and had just encountered a man worth studying. The Crossfire Ranch appeared out of the dark in pieces. First the gate, then the long fence line, then the shapes of outbuildings, then the main house itself, low and wide, with a light burning in the front window. It was bigger than Martha had expected. Not grand, nothing about it said wealth or performance, but solid. Built to last rather than to impress. Cole stepped down from the wagon before it had fully stopped and tied the team with quick, practiced hands. Then he stood and looked at the house and was quiet for a moment. "Main house has 6 bedrooms," he said. "Pick whichever one suits you. There's food in the kitchen, nothing fancy, but it's there. I'll be in the barn." Martha climbed down, still holding the sleeping Clara, and looked at him. "You're sleeping in the barn?" "Yes, ma'am." "That's your house?" "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Bennett." "Cole." "Cole." She looked at him steadily. "We are not putting you out of your own house. You're not putting me anywhere. I'm choosing." He looked back at her with that same direct, flat, entirely unreadable expression. "You don't know me, Mrs. Reynolds. Your kids don't know me. I'd rather earn the right to be under the same roof than take it for granted." He paused. "That's all." Martha opened her mouth, closed it. Clara stirred in her arms and made a small sound without waking. James had climbed down from the wagon and was standing behind Martha with his arms crossed and his eyes on Cole with an expression caught halfway between skepticism and something he wasn't ready to name. Cole Bennett picked up a lantern from the hook beside the barn door, lit it, and walked inside without looking back. The door swung shut behind him. Martha stood in the yard with her 6 children around her in the Texas night, looking at a house she'd never seen before on land she didn't know belonging to a man she didn't understand. "Mama," Eliza said quietly, "what do we do?" Martha looked at the house, at the light in the window, at the wide porch and the solid walls and the 6 bedrooms that were waiting. "We go inside," she said, "and we take care of each other, same as we always have." She walked to the front door and pushed it open, and her children followed her in. Behind them in the barn, a lantern burned small and steady through the dark, and the man who had spent everything he had for strangers settled into the hay and stared at the rafters overhead, alone with whatever he was carrying, and whatever it was, he had been carrying it a long time. The first morning on the Crossfire Ranch arrived without ceremony. Martha was already awake when the light came. She'd been awake most of the night, lying in the center of a bed that belonged to a stranger in a house she didn't own, listening to the sounds of 6 children sleeping in rooms on either side of her down the hall. She'd counted their breathing the way she always did when fear got the better of sense. Clara, Sam, Anna, Eliza, Robert, James. All 6. All here. All still. She got up before sunrise and found the kitchen by memory and put water on for coffee. And she was standing at the stove when the back door opened, and Cole Bennett walked in from the barn, with hay on his sleeve and his hat already on. He stopped when he saw her. "Didn't expect anyone up this early," he said. "I could say the same." He hung his hat on the hook by the door. She noticed he did it without looking the habit of a man who had done the same thing 10,000 times and went to the basin to wash his hands. "Sleep all right?" "Well enough." She poured 2 cups without asking and set one on the table. "Sit down." He looked at the cup. Then he sat. They drank their coffee in silence for a while, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people too tired for pretense. Outside, the ranch was beginning to find its sounds. Horses moving in the paddock. Something calling from far off across the land. "You knew my husband," Martha said. She hadn't planned to say it first thing, but she'd been awake all night turning it over, and the directness of the previous day had apparently become a habit now, or maybe it had always been a habit, and she'd just stopped apologizing for it. Cole set his cup down slowly. "What makes you say that?" "The way you looked when Robert mentioned his father served." She watched his face. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. He was quiet for long enough that she knew she was right. "Daniel Reynolds and I served together," he said. "Marines. Long time ago. Lost touch after we both came back. Different directions." He turned the cup in his hands. "I heard about his death about 4 months ago through an old contact. Heard it called an accident." He paused. "I didn't believe it." Martha's hands went still on the table. "Why not?" "Because Daniel Reynolds was the most careful man I ever knew," Cole said. "And because 3 weeks before he died, he wrote me a letter." The kitchen went very quiet. "What did the letter say?" Cole reached into his shirt pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table between them. Martha looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up. The handwriting was Daniel's. She would have known it anywhere that particular slant. The way he made his capital letters and the date at the top was March 14th, 1883. 6 weeks before he died. "Cole, I don't have much time to explain this properly, so I'll be plain. Victor Hale wants this land. I've told him no twice, and I think he's going to stop asking. If something happens to me, my wife's name is Martha. She's the strongest person I've ever known, and she doesn't know it yet. If she needs help, and there's nobody left, I'm asking you. I know it's a large thing to ask. I wouldn't ask it if I had anyone else. Daniel." Martha read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along the original creases and set it back on the table and pressed both hands flat against the wood and breathed. "He knew," she said. "He suspected. He knew." Her voice was steady, and something hard and bright was moving behind her eyes. "He knew, and he didn't tell me. He was trying to protect me from knowing, and it didn't protect me from anything. It just meant I had no time to—" She stopped, pressed her hands harder against the table. "He should have told me." "Yes," Cole said simply. "He should have." She looked up. She had expected him to defend Daniel. Men usually defended each other in these things. Some reflex of loyalty and the absence of that defense caught her off guard. "You're not going to tell me he was right to keep it from me?" "No, ma'am, I'm not." He looked at her steadily. "You had a right to know. What he was afraid of. What was coming. All of it. You had a right to prepare." He paused. "That was a mistake he made. It doesn't mean he didn't love you." Martha looked at the letter on the table. "I know he loved me," she said very quietly. "That's not the question." She picked up her cup and finished her coffee and stood, and she was turning toward the stove when James's voice came from the doorway. "How long have you had that letter?" Both of them turned. James was standing in the kitchen doorway in his work clothes, arms crossed, jaw set, in that way he had. That was so entirely his father's. It sometimes stopped Martha's breath. He was looking at Cole with an expression that was not anger exactly. It was past anger. It was the cold, flat place on the other side of anger. "James," Martha started. "I want to know," he said. "How long have you had it?" Cole looked at the boy without flinching. 4 months. 4 months. James's jaw tightened. "And in 4 months you never came to find us. Never sent word. Never told anyone that your friend wrote you a letter saying his life was in danger." "James, that is enough." "No, Mama." He didn't raise his voice. He kept it very level, and the levelness of it was worse somehow than shouting would have been. "This man spent $4,000 on us yesterday like it was nothing. He had a letter from Pa for 4 months saying to help us if something went wrong. And we stood in that yard getting auctioned off like horses while he sat on a ranch 40 miles away. He looked at Cole. "I want to know why." Cole was silent for a moment. "You're right to ask that," he said. "I know I am. I was in Colorado when I got the letter. By the time I got back to Texas and started asking questions, it had been 2 months and the trail was cold, and everyone I talked to said it was an accident." He paused. "I should have come sooner. I didn't move fast enough and your family paid for it. There's nothing I can say that changes that." James stared at him. "That's it. That's all you've got." "That's all I've got," Cole said. "I can't give you more than the truth." Something cracked in James's expression just slightly, just for a second, and underneath the anger was something so raw and grieving it was almost unbearable to look at. "My father is dead," he said. "I know. My sisters got put up for sale yesterday like they were nothing. I know. And you were 40 miles away with a letter in your pocket." "Yes." James turned and walked out the back door. It didn't slam. He controlled himself that far, but the silence he left behind was loud. Martha closed her eyes for a moment. "He's right," she said. "I know." "Don't expect him to forgive that easily." "I don't," Cole said. "I don't expect him to forgive it at all." She opened her eyes and looked at him. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before, a particular kind of stillness that wasn't strength, but was what strength looked like when it was being used to hold something in. Something that hurt. She thought about his wife. His son. 5 years ago, he'd said. She thought about a man who had lost his family, and then received a letter from an old friend asking him to protect someone else's, and had moved too slowly and lived with that ever since. "Go find him," she said. "Don't explain. Don't apologize again. Just go work beside him." Cole looked at her. "Ma'am. James doesn't need words right now. He needs to see what you do." She looked at him steadily. "Go find him and put him to work. He'll respect that more than anything you could say." Cole picked up his hat from the hook. He went. The day was hard and physical, and long in the way that ranch days always were, and Martha let it fill her. Let the tasks take up the space where fear lived, so there wasn't room for both at once. Eliza proved herself immediately capable, following Martha through the kitchen, with a competence that only children who had been running households since they were old enough to reach a stove ever had. Robert appointed himself general of the younger two and was managing Sam and Anna with the particular combination of firmness and patience that was entirely his own personality. Clara had found the horses. That became apparent around mid-morning when the paddock went very quiet, and Martha looked out to find Cole's largest horse, standing with its nose pressed against Clara's hair, while the 4-year-old patted its face with both hands and spoke to it in a serious, continuous murmur. Cole was 6 feet away, leaning on the fence watching. "Should I get her?" Martha called. "She's fine," he said. "Duke likes her." Duke is a horse that likes a 4-year-old. Duke doesn't like anyone. First time he's let someone touch his face in 2 years. He paused. "Your daughter's unusual." "I know." Clara looked up from the horse's face. "Mama, his name is Duke, and he says he's been very lonely." "Horses don't talk, baby." "This one does." Clara went back to patting him. "He says there used to be more people here, and then they went away and it got quiet." Martha glanced at Cole. He was looking at Clara with an expression she didn't have a word for. "Used to be," he said quietly, to no one in particular. It was late afternoon when the rider came. Martha heard the horse before she saw it coming in fast up the ranch road, which was wrong because nobody came onto someone else's property at speed unless they were bringing trouble or being followed by it. She stepped out onto the porch, and Cole appeared from the direction of the barn, at almost the same moment wiping his hands on a rag, watching the rider come. The man pulled up hard at the gate. He was one of Victor Hale's men. Martha recognized him, had seen him standing behind Victor at the auction, one of the two who'd been positioned like bookends. "Bennett," the man said. He didn't dismount. "Mr. Hale sends his regards." "That's so," Cole said. He had stopped in the yard, easy, relaxed hands at his sides. "He says the woman and her children are welcome to stay through the week. After that, it's going to be complicated for everyone involved." Complicated how? The man smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. He says you know how. He says you've got your own history with the county records office, and it would be a shame to have all that looked at carefully. Cole was quiet for a moment. You tell Victor Hale, he said, that the Reynolds family is here as my guests, and they'll leave when they choose to leave and not one day before. And you tell him that any man who sets foot on this property uninvited is going to find out real fast what kind of a welcome I keep. The man's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Mr. Hale figured you'd say something like that. Good. Then he won't be surprised. A long pause. He also says he's got friends in Austin, the man said. Judges, countymen, people who remember things. People who can remember things that didn't happen if the price is right. Victor Hale's had friends in Austin for 20 years, Cole said. And he's still working on taking land from widows and selling children in auction yards, so I wouldn't lean too hard on those friendships if I were him. The man stared at him. Then he pulled the horse around and rode back out the gate. James had come to stand at the corner of the barn during this exchange and was watching the rider go with tight eyes. He's going to come back, he said. Yes, Cole said. With more men. Probably. What do we do? Cole looked at him, and something had shifted between them since the morning not fixed, not forgiven, but different. The hard edge in James's expression had not softened, but it had turned slightly the way a blade turns when it finds a new direction. We don't run, Cole said. We don't hide. We stand here, and we do the work, and we make sure when they come back they find something solid. James looked at the empty gate road for a moment. Pa used to say you were the toughest man he ever met, he said. He said it without warmth. Still, it was information, not a compliment. Your father was generous, Cole said. He wasn't generous. He was accurate. James turned and went back to the barn. Cole stood in the yard alone for a moment. Then Martha said from the porch, He's starting to trust you. Cole looked over at her. That wasn't trust, he said. Not yet, she agreed. But it's the beginning of it. Trust starts with respect, and James is nearly there. She paused. He told you what his father said about you. James doesn't give that kind of thing away, unless he means it. Cole was quiet. Mrs. Reynolds. Martha. A pause. Martha. He said the name carefully, like it was something he was testing the weight of. You should know that Victor Hale is not going to let this go. What I said to that man, I meant every word of it. But I need you to understand what that means. This isn't over. It's barely started. I know that, she said. He's going to come at us from every direction, legal, financial, every direction. I know. Are you scared? She considered the question honestly. Yes, she said. But I've been scared for 4 months and I'm still here. I think scared is just what it feels like to be paying attention. Something crossed Cole Bennett's face. It moved fast, like light off water here, and then gone. Daniel said you were the strongest person he knew, he said. Martha looked at him. He told you that. In the letter. And before that years ago when we were still in contact. He looked at the ground briefly. He talked about you like you were the fixed point, the thing that made the rest of it make sense. Martha stood very still on the porch. The evening light was coming in long and gold, and the ranch was settling into its night sounds, and somewhere behind her she could hear Sam arguing with Robert about something, and Anna telling them both to stop, and the ordinary aliveness of her children filled the air around her like music. He should have told me, she said again. But her voice was different this time, softer, less like anger and more like grief. Yes, Cole said. He should have. I would have fought beside him. I know. Instead of being left to fight after. Cole looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd laid eyes on him in that auction yard, the careful flatness in his face gave way to something unguarded. Something that had clearly not been shown to many people in a long time. I know, he said again. And there was something in how he said it that told her he wasn't speaking only about Daniel and Martha anymore. He was speaking about something else entirely. some loss of his own that had left him with the same particular shape of grief, the grief of being the one left to fight after. The evening came on. The children came in from the day's work and gathered at the table, and Martha put food in front of them, and they ate with the deep, uncomplicated hunger of people who had worked hard, and for one long moment everything felt almost like something that might eventually become normal. And then Robert, who had been quiet through the whole meal in the particular way he got quiet when something was working its way through his mind, looked up from his plate and said, "Cole, can I ask you something?" "You can ask," Cole said. "Victor Hale said you had history with the county records office. What did he mean by that?" The table went still. Cole set down his fork. He looked at Robert for a long moment, at this 13-year-old with the old serious eyes who asked questions like a man and waited for answers like one too. "That's a fair question," Cole said. "I thought so. And it deserves a fair answer." He looked around the table, at all of them, at Martha last. "I'll tell you, but not tonight." He paused. "Tonight you eat and you rest, and tomorrow I'll tell you all of it. Whatever you want to know." Robert considered this. "All of it," he said. "All of it," Cole said. And whatever was in his voice when he said it made Martha's stomach tighten, because it was the voice of a man who had been carrying a secret that had grown heavier every year, and who had just for the first time agreed to set it down. Cole told them after breakfast the next morning the way he said he would. He sat at the head of the table with his coffee going cold in front of him, and all 6 children arranged around him in various states of attention. Clara in Martha's lap, Sam leaning so far forward he was nearly on the table. Robert with his arms crossed and his eyes steady, James against the wall with his jaw set, and he told them. 5 years ago, he said, my wife Sarah was alive, and my son Thomas was 3 years old, and I was working a land deal with a man in Austin I thought I could trust. His name was Gerald Mercer, county records officer. He came to me with a proposition, said he knew of parcels that were going to be sold cheap through the county land with good water, good grass, and if I got in early with the right paperwork, I could acquire 500 acres before anyone else knew it was available. He paused. What I didn't know was that Mercer was working for Victor Hale. The land wasn't available through honest channels. It had been taken through forged documents from families who didn't know it was happening until it was already done. The kitchen was very quiet. So the land I bought, he said, some of it was stolen land. I didn't know that when I bought it. But I signed the paperwork. My name is on those records. He looked at Robert. That's what Victor meant. He's been holding it over my head for 2 years, waiting for the moment he needed it. Robert was quiet for a moment. Did you know the families? No. Did you try to find them? I've been trying for 2 years. Cole looked down at his hands. 3 families. I found one of them. Bought the land back from myself and gave it to them. The other 2 I'm still looking. James from the wall said, How does a man not know he's buying stolen land? He trusts the wrong person, Cole said simply. And he moves too fast because he wants the land and he doesn't ask enough questions. He looked at James. I made a mistake. A bad one. And people got hurt by it that didn't deserve to be hurt. And your wife? Eliza said quietly. She was the quietest of the 6 Eliza, but when she spoke it always landed. Something moved across Cole's face. Sarah died that winter, he said. Fever. Thomas too. 3 weeks apart. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed saying so many times it no longer comes out ragged. Just flat. Just true. I don't know that it was related to any of this. I'll never know for certain. But I know that I was so consumed with the deal and the aftermath and trying to fix what I'd done that I wasn't paying attention to what was right in front of me. He stopped. That's what Victor has on me. That's all of it. Clara slid off Martha's lap and walked around the table and stood in front of Cole and looked up at him with 4-year-old gravity. Are you sad about Thomas? She said. Cole looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. She climbed up onto the bench beside him without invitation and pressed herself against his arm and said nothing else. Cole sat very still, James pushed off the wall and walked out the back door. Martha started to stand, but Cole said quietly, "Let him go. Give him a minute." And something in how he said it told her he understood James's anger in a way that wasn't just about the two of them, that it was the kind of understanding that only came from having been inside that same anger yourself. "All right," she said. "So Victor Hale has something on you, and you have something on him, or you will if we can prove what happened to Daniel." "Yes." "Then the question is, which of us gets there first?" Cole looked at her. "That's exactly the question." The answer to that question arrived 3 days later in a form none of them had planned for. Martha had gone through Daniel's belongings, the small trunk she'd managed to save from the house before it was seized, the things she'd carried on her back the day they left. She had been through everything in it a dozen times already. She knew every item. So when she opened it that morning, for no reason she could articulate, just a restlessness that sent her to her knees. In front of it, she wasn't expecting to find anything new. She almost didn't find it. It was sewn into the lining of Daniel's good jacket, the one he'd worn to church on Sundays, the one she'd packed, because she couldn't leave it, a small folded piece of paper, stitched in with such care that you'd only find it if you were looking, or if the stitching had started to come loose, the way stitching does after months of being carried and handled. The stitching had come loose. She sat on the floor of the bedroom with the paper in her hands and read it twice, and then went downstairs and through the house and out into the yard and said, "Cole." He came from the barn at something close to a run when he heard her voice. She held the paper out to him. He read it. His face went very still. "Where did you find this?" "In the lining of his jacket. He sewed it in." Cole read it again. Then he looked up at her. "This is a list of properties," he said. 8 of them, with the names of the original owners and dates of transfer. "I recognized 3 of the names," Martha said. "Families from this county. Small ranchers, farmers, people who lost their land in the last 5 years, and nobody could ever explain exactly how." "And the last entry," Cole said. "Reynolds Daniel, March 1883. Martha's voice didn't waver. "He documented it before they could finish what they were doing to him. He knew. He knew, and he hid the evidence in his jacket and hoped I'd find it." Cole folded the paper carefully and held it. "This is enough to start something," he said. "Not enough to finish it. We need the originals, Hale's ledgers, the forged deeds, the payment records. Daniel names all of it here, but we need the physical evidence." "Where are they?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I know where they are," he said. She stared at him. "How?" "Because Mercer told me 2 years ago, before he lost his nerve and ran. He was drunk and he was scared, and he said Hale keeps everything at the mansion hidden room off the library. Said Hale was too arrogant to use a bank for things like that. Wanted them close so he could look at them." He paused. "Hale is holding a fundraiser dinner next Saturday. Half the county will be there. The house will be full of people." Martha understood immediately. "Full of people," she said, "means everyone is focused on the party." "Yes." "And nobody's watching the library." "No, they're not." They looked at each other. "That's a dangerous idea," she said. "Yes," he said. If we're caught, Victor wins everything. Your children, my ranch, both of us likely imprisoned on whatever charges he can invent." Martha thought about Daniel's jacket, about the stitching he'd done himself, with careful hands hiding the truth in the only place he thought it might survive. "When do we leave?" she said. James found out that night. Martha hadn't decided yet whether to tell him he was 16, he was her child. The risk was enormous, but James had his father's instincts, and he'd been watching Cole all week with those new careful eyes, and he came to Martha's bedroom door after the younger children were asleep and said, "What are you and Cole planning?" She told him. All of it. James sat on the edge of her bed and listened without moving, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I'm coming with you," he said. "No." "Mama." "No, James, listen to me." She turned to face him. "If something goes wrong, your brothers and sisters need someone here. They need you here. That is not a small thing, that is the most important thing. Do you understand me?" James's jaw was working. "I should be there," he said. "You should be here," she said. "That's where your father would put you, right here, watching over them." The mention of Daniel landed like it always did, like something physical, something with weight. James went very still. "He'd tell you you're crazy," he said finally. "Going into Hale's house in the middle of a party." "Probably," Martha agreed. "He'd also tell you he loved you for it." Martha looked at her oldest son, at the man he was already becoming, the man his father had started to make him. And she reached out and put her hand on his face, the way she hadn't done since he was small, and he let her. "Take care of them," she said. "Always," he said. He stood up and went to the door and then stopped. "Cole," he said without turning around. "He's a good man." "I know. I still don't forgive him for not coming sooner. I know that too. But he's a good man." He left. The following Saturday arrived with the particular stillness that precedes dangerous things. Cole and Martha left the ranch in the early evening in the old wagon, dressed in the plainest clothes that wouldn't draw attention. And Martha spent the first hour of the drive reciting Daniel's list to herself until she had it memorized in case the paper was taken from them. Cole drove and said very little, which was his way, and Martha found she no longer needed him to fill the silence. Victor Hale's mansion sat on 40 acres north of Calhoun, with lights blazing from every window, and the sound of conversation and music carried far out into the dark. Hired carriages lined the road. Men in good coats and women in good dresses moved in and out of the front entrance. They went in the back. The kitchen entrance was unlocked. It always was during big dinners, Cole said, because the cook needed her people moving in and out all evening, and they slipped through it and into the servants' passage that ran parallel to the main hall, and Cole moved through it like a man who had walked it before. "Have you been here?" Martha said very quietly. "Once," he said, "before I knew what Hale was." The library was dark and empty. Cole had the door open in seconds, a skill Martha decided not to ask about, and they were inside. The hidden room was behind the second bookcase from the left, which pivoted on a hinge that had been designed to look like a wall, but squeaked very slightly when moved. Cole found it in under a minute. Inside 3 lockboxes, a leather ledger, and a stack of folded documents tied with cord. Martha opened the ledger with hands that were steady through sheer force of decision. The entries went back 12 years. Properties, names, amounts paid to judges, to county officials, to bank officers. The names of the original owners crossed out. The dates of transfer. A systematic, meticulous record of theft conducted over more than a decade by a man so confident in his own impunity that he'd written it all down. Daniel's name was there. April 3rd, 1883. Reynolds D. acquisition completed. Method, accidental. The word accidental was in quotation marks. Martha stood with the ledger open in her hands and did not breathe for a full 10 seconds. Then she said very quietly, "He wrote it down. He wrote down that he killed my husband, and he put it in quotation marks like it was a joke." Cole put his hand on her arm. "Martha, he wrote it down," she said again, and her voice was doing something she had not given it permission to do. "He sat in this room and he wrote my husband's name in a book like he was livestock, and he put quotation marks around the word accidental because he thought it was funny." "I know," Cole said. "I know, and we're going to use it, but we need to move." She closed the ledger. She tucked it under her arm. Cole took the documents. They turned for the door and found a woman standing in it. Martha had never seen her before. She was perhaps 50, elegantly dressed for the party, with dark hair going silver and a face that bore the particular expression of someone who has been frightened for so long that it had settled into the bones. She looked at the ledger under Martha's arm. She looked at Martha's face, and she said, "You're Daniel Reynolds' wife." Martha said nothing. Every nerve in her body was measuring the distance to the door. "I'm Catherine Hale," the woman said, "Victor's wife." She paused. "I've been waiting for someone to come for that ledger for 8 years. Silence. Cole said slowly, "Mrs. Hale, "I know what you're thinking," she said. "I know exactly what you're thinking, and I don't blame you, but hear me out." She stepped inside the room and pulled the door almost closed behind her, and her hands were shaking. "I heard Victor talking to his man last week about the Reynolds widow and the Bennett ranch. I know what he's planning. He's not going to stop at legal and financial pressure." She looked at Martha directly. "He's going to do what he did to your husband. He's already talking about it." The room went very cold. "How do you know that?" Cole said. "Because I've been listening to that man for 23 years, Catherine Hale said. "And because the last time he talked about someone that way, a construction worker in Calhoun County, had a very unfortunate accident 3 weeks later." She held Cole's eyes. "I can't stay silent anymore. I have children too. They're grown now, and they don't know what their father is, and when this comes out, and it will come out, I want them to know their mother did not stand beside a monster to the end." Martha looked at this woman, at the fear in her hands, the decision in her eyes, the cost that was written all over her face. "What will you do?" Martha said. "I'll testify," Catherine said. "Everything I've witnessed, everything I've overheard, 23 years of it." She paused. "But you need to know the moment Victor realizes what I've done, nothing is safe. Not your children, not your ranch, not any of us." She looked at the ledger. "Take it," she said. "Take all of it, and run." They ran. Not literally running drew attention, and attention was the one thing they could not afford, but they moved through that servant's passage with the ledger pressed against Martha's body and Cole's hand at her back, and Catherine Hale's footsteps fading behind them as she slipped back into the party, back to her husband's side. Back to the performance she had been giving for 23 years. They were 3 miles down the road before either of them spoke. "She's going to testify," Martha said. Not a question. She was turning it over, weighing it, testing it the way she tested everything now. "She said she would. Do you believe her?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I believe she meant it when she said it. Whether she can hold to it when Victor finds out?" He paused. "That's a different thing. He's going to find out tonight." "Probably." "The ledger will be missing." "Yes." Martha looked down at the book in her lap. 12 years of crimes bound in leather recorded in a neat, careful hand that she already hated the sight of. Daniel's name on a page with quotation marks around the word accidental. "He's going to come for us," she said. "Yes." "Tonight? Tomorrow more likely. He'll want to think first, figure out who took it and how." Cole's hands were steady on the reins. "But we've got maybe 12 hours before everything changes. Then we use 12 hours. They got back to the ranch at midnight. James was awake on the porch, sitting in the dark, with his arms on his knees, and he stood the moment he heard the wagon. Martha was down before it fully stopped. "We got it," she said. James looked at the ledger in her hands. "Is Pa's name in there?" "Yes." Something moved across his face, relief and grief arriving at the same moment, tangled up together the way they always were. "What do we do now?" "Wake Robert," Martha said. "I need someone with a sharp mind and paper, and I need it in the next 10 minutes. Robert, when woken, was annoyed for approximately 4 seconds, and then completely alert. He sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen while Martha and Cole talked, and he wrote. And what he produced over the next 2 hours was something that would have been remarkable for a grown lawyer, a clean, organized summary of every relevant entry in the ledger cross-referenced with Daniel's hidden list, with dates, names, and amounts laid out in columns that made the pattern of Victor Hale's crimes impossible to miss. "How does a 13-year-old know how to do this?" Cole said at one point, looking over Robert's shoulder. "Pa taught me," Robert said without looking up. "He said a man who can organize his thinking on paper can win any argument." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Smart man," he said. "I know," Robert said. They were done before dawn. Martha sent Cole to find Judge Adler, not the county judge he was in Hale's pocket, and everyone knew it. Judge Adler was a circuit judge out of San Antonio who had a reputation for being the particular kind of man that money could not move, which in Texas in 1883 made him something close to legendary. Cole knew where he was staying, had known for 2 weeks, had been tracking the circuit schedule since the day he decided this was coming to a courtroom eventually. Cole rode out at first light. Martha sat at the table with Daniel's jacket in her hands and waited. The first threat came mid-morning. Not a rider this time. A letter delivered by a boy of maybe 12, who clearly had no idea what he was carrying, left at the gate with Martha's name on the outside. Inside, in Victor Hale's clean handwriting, "Return what you took. By sundown. Or I will make sure your children never see the inside of a schoolroom in this state again. This is the only offer you will receive." Martha read it twice. Then she handed it to Eliza. "Put that with the ledger," she said. "That's evidence too." Eliza took the letter with steady hands. She was 14 and she had her mother's jaw. "He's threatening the children," she said. "Yes." "Are you scared?" Martha looked at her oldest daughter, at the young woman she was already, the steel in her that had been there since she was small, that Martha had watched grow quietly all these years, without ever quite saying how proud it made her. "Yes," Martha said. "But scared isn't the same as stopped." Eliza nodded once, the way a person nods when something they already believed gets confirmed. "Good," she said. And she went to put the letter with the ledger. Cole came back with Judge Adler at noon. The judge was a compact man in his 60s with white hair and a face like weathered rock and eyes that had clearly seen every variation of human dishonesty and had stopped being surprised by it. He sat at the kitchen table and read Robert's summary, and then the relevant pages of the ledger, and then Daniel's original list, and he was quiet for a long time. "Reynolds," he said finally. "The construction accident." "Yes, sir," Martha said. "I remember hearing about that." He looked at her. "You're the widow." "Yes." He looked back at the ledger. "April 3rd. Acquisition completed. Method." He stopped on the quotation marks. His jaw went tight in a way that was the only emotion he showed. "Victor Hale wrote this himself." "His handwriting," Cole said. "I've seen enough of his documents to know it." Judge Adler closed the ledger. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "I'm going to be direct with you, because I think you prefer it." "I do," she said. "Victor Hale has significant influence in this county and several adjacent ones. The lawyers he will bring to this proceeding will be expensive and aggressive, and they will attempt to discredit you personally in every way they can devise. They will attack your character, your finances, your appearance, your fitness as a mother." He paused. "I've seen men break on that witness stand under less. Are you prepared for that?" Martha thought about the auction yard. About standing in the July heat while people laughed at her weight. Her clothes, her desperation, while a man put a price on her children. She thought about doing it again in a courtroom with lawyers this time, instead of auctioneers. "Yes," she said. "You're certain?" "Judge Adler," she said, "I have buried my husband, lost my home, been sold at a public auction, and driven 40 miles in the dark with stolen evidence in my lap. I am extremely certain." The judge looked at her for a moment. Then something shifted in his weathered face, not quite a smile, but something in that direction. "All right," he said. "The hearing will be Monday morning. Calhoun County Courthouse, 9 o'clock. He stood. "I would strongly suggest you don't go anywhere between now and then." "We won't," Cole said. The judge left. Victor moved that same afternoon. 2 of his men came to the ranch road, not onto the property, just to the gate, visible from the porch, and stood there. Just stood. Not speaking, not moving, just making sure Martha could see them from the house. "He wants you scared," Cole said, standing beside her on the porch. "I know. You scared. Less than he wants me to be." James came and stood on her other side. Then Robert. Then Eliza with Anna behind her, and Sam pressing forward to see. Clara appeared between Cole and Martha and took one hand from each of them without asking, the way 4-year-olds assigned themselves to situations. The men at the gate stood there for an hour. Then they left. Nobody on the porch said anything, but James quietly said, "Pa would have liked this." "Liked what?" Martha said. "This." He made a small gesture that seemed to mean all of it, the porch, the people on it, the men who'd left the standing firm. He always said the only way to beat a bully is to let him see your face and not flinch. He paused. You didn't flinch, Mama. Martha put her arm around her oldest son's shoulders and held on hard. Monday came, like a stone dropping. The Calhoun County Courthouse was full. Word had gotten around the way word always did in small Texas towns, through back doors and kitchen conversations, and men talking quietly over fences. And by 9 in the morning, the gallery was packed with people who had come to watch, some of them hoping Victor won, and some of them hoping he didn't, and most of them with the particular expression of people who had been carrying guilt about something for a long time, and weren't sure yet whether today was the day they'd have to face it. Victor Hale arrived with 3 lawyers. They were from San Antonio, expensive suits, the practiced arrogance of men who charged by the hour and billed for condescension as a service. The lead lawyer's name was Aldrich. He was perhaps 45, handsome in a cold way, and he looked at Martha the way men looked at problems they'd been paid to remove. He started before the proceeding was formally opened, speaking to someone beside him, just loudly enough for the gallery to hear. The woman brought a stolen private document as her primary evidence. This will be over by lunch. Cole, seated beside Martha, said nothing. Martha said nothing. Judge Adler came in, and the room stood. It began. Aldrich presented Victor's case first: the debt, the auction, the legal documentation, the validity of every transfer, 12 years of spotless official records. It was smooth and professional, and it was all built on the same foundation, which was forgery. And Martha sat through all of it with her hands flat on the table and her face composed. Then it was her turn. Aldrich cross-examined her for over an hour. He attacked the debt. She explained it was forged. He attacked her ability to understand financial documents. She listed every document she'd reviewed and what was wrong with each one. He questioned her mental state following her husband's death. She said her mental state following her husband's murder was exactly what anyone's would be. The word murder landed in the gallery like a dropped plate. Aldrich smiled. Your husband's death was ruled an accident, Mrs. Reynolds, by a judge who received payment from Victor Hale on March 29, 1883, Martha said, which is recorded on page 47 of Mr. Hale's ledger, along with the judge's name, the amount, and the notation, and I'm quoting directly, Calhoun ruling secured. Would you like me to read the entry aloud, Mr. Aldrich? Or would you prefer to take a moment? The courtroom erupted. Aldrich's smile went very rigid. Judge Adler called for order. Victor Hale at the opposite table was looking at Martha with an expression she had never seen from him before. Not the cold amusement he'd worn at the auction, not the calculating patience of a man who expected to win. Something rawer. Something that looked almost like fear. Good, she thought. Aldrich recovered. He moved to her character, her poverty, her dependence, her history of making accusations she couldn't substantiate. He implied she had fabricated the hidden list. He said with a particular tone that made several women in the gallery go very still, that a woman in her condition, and he paused on those words, let them do their work, was not perhaps the most reliable narrator of events. Martha looked at him calmly. My condition, she said. Your situation, your emotional state, the strain of your circumstances. You mean my weight, Mr. Aldrich? A silence. That's not what I... You've said the phrase in her condition 3 times this morning, and looked at my body each time you said it. The gallery noticed. Judge Adler noticed. She looked at Aldrich steadily. You are welcome to make your case against my character, if that's what you have. But I have 6 children who stood in an auction yard and watched their mother fight for them, and they are in this gallery right now watching me again, and I intend to be someone they can be proud of regardless of what you say about my body, or my grief, or my fitness. She heard someone in the gallery make a sound. Not a laugh, something else. Approval or recognition or grief. Aldrich sat down. Cole reached under the table and pressed his hand briefly over hers. She did not look at him, but she felt it, the steadiness of it, the simple solid presence, and she let herself take it. Then Judge Adler said, I understand there is an additional witness. Aldrich was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, we have received no notification of any additional. She came forward this morning, Judge Adler said. Given the gravity of the charges, I have elected to hear her testimony. He looked at the door. Mrs. Hale, please come forward. The gallery went absolutely silent. Catherine Hale walked in from the side door in plain clothes. She had changed from the expensive dress she'd been wearing when she arrived. Martha noticed as if she'd needed to shed something before she could do this, and she walked to the front of the room without looking at her husband. Victor Hale stood up. Catherine. Sit down, Victor, she said. She didn't say it loudly. She said it the way a woman says something she has been practicing for 23 years and is finally ready to mean. He sat down. Not because he was told. Because something in her voice reached him in a place that his lawyers and his judges and his hired men couldn't reach, the place that knew her, that had always known her, that understood this was not a performance. This was real. She took the stand, and she told them everything. 23 years of it. Names. Dates. Conversations she had overheard through walls and doors and the thin partitions that wealthy men believed separated their business from their households. The night Victor came home after Daniel Reynolds died and poured himself a drink and said nothing at all, which was how she always knew when something bad had been done. Not from confession, but from silence. The ledger she had found once and been told to forget. The payments she had watched recorded. The families she had seen lose their land and never understood why until she did understand and could no longer stop understanding. She did not look at Victor once. Victor Hale's lawyers objected 7 times. Judge Adler overruled all 7. When Catherine finished, the courtroom was so quiet that Martha could hear Clara breathing somewhere behind her. Then Judge Adler said, "I've heard enough." He looked at the ledger. He looked at Daniel's list. He looked at Robert's summary, which he had studied carefully that morning. He looked at Catherine Hale, who was sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her chin up and her eyes dry. And then he looked at Victor Hale, who for the first time in this proceeding looked like a man who understood what was about to happen to him. Victor Hale. Judge Adler said, "You are hereby remanded to custody, pending formal charges of fraud, forgery, bribery of judicial officers, unlawful land acquisition, and conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Daniel Tobias Reynolds." He paused. "This court orders the immediate return of all properties identified in Exhibit 1 to their original owners or surviving families. All documents and transfers originating from forged instruments are void as of this moment." 2 county deputies moved toward Victor. For one moment, just one Victor looked across the room at Martha. His face had lost the veneer entirely now, and underneath it was just a man who had believed for so long that he was untouchable that he had forgotten what consequences felt like. Martha looked back at him. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply held his gaze with the same steady level look she had given him in the auction yard, and she did not look away, and he did. The deputies took his arms. Behind her, Sam made a small sound and then tried to cover it. Eliza put her arm around her brother. James very quietly said, "That's for you, Pa." And Martha pressed both hands flat on the table in front of her and breathed and let herself feel for the first time in months the particular lightness that comes when a weight you've been carrying so long you forgot it wasn't part of you finally lifts. The courthouse steps were loud with people, and Martha stood in the middle of it feeling strangely calm, the way the air goes calm in the exact center of a storm. Cole was beside her. Her children were around her. Victor Hale was being walked to a county jail cell by 2 deputies, and the crowd on those steps was doing the complicated thing that crowds do when they've witnessed something they didn't expect, shifting and murmuring and looking at each other to figure out what they were supposed to feel. A woman Martha recognized, Ellen Marsh, who ran the dry goods store and had been at the auction yard, pushed through to her and stopped and said, "Mrs. Reynolds, I want to say," and then stopped again, her face working. "Don't," Martha said, not unkindly. "I should have spoken up that day. At the auction. I saw what was happening and I know," Martha said. "So did a lot of people." She looked at Ellen Marsh steadily. "The question is what we do next." Ellen nodded. Her eyes were wet. She stepped back. 3 more people tried to approach Martha in the next 10 minutes with versions of the same conversation: the apology, the guilt, the explanation, and Martha received each one the same way. Not with coldness, not with forgiveness either, just with the plain look of a woman who had moved past needing any of it. James was watching her. "You're not going to let them off easy," he said quietly. "I'm not going to carry their guilt for them," Martha said. "That's different from making it hard." James thought about that for a moment. "Pa used to say that too," he said. "Almost exactly that." Martha felt the familiar ache move through her sharp, and then settling the way grief did when you'd learn to live alongside it. "He was a smart man," she said. "Yeah," James said. "He was." Cole appeared at her shoulder. "Judge Adler wants a word before we leave." The judge was brief and direct, which Martha had already understood was simply his nature. He told her the property transfer would be processed within the week. The Reynolds land, her land, Daniel's land, the land his father had broken his back on, would be returned to her by the following Monday. "What about the other families?" Martha said immediately. "The ones on Daniel's list. Each case will be reviewed individually. It will take time." "How much time?" "Mrs. Reynolds." "They've already waited years," she said. "Some of them lost everything the same way I did. I want to know there's a process moving for them, not just for me." The judge looked at her for a moment. "I'll make sure of it personally." "Thank you," she said. And she meant it, and it didn't sound like gratitude so much as one capable person acknowledging another. Cole walked her out. On the road back to the ranch with the children in the wagon bed behind them and the afternoon moving long over the Texas land, Cole said, "There's something I need to tell you." Martha looked at him. He stopped, started again. "When I told you about Mercer and the land deals, I told you everything I knew at the time. But since then, since the day I found Daniel's letter, I've been looking at the records more carefully." He kept his eyes on the road. The paperwork that Mercer used as a template for the fraudulent transfers. He modeled it on my original purchase, the legitimate one I made 4 years ago. He paused. "Which means when I bought my land through Mercer, cleanly legitimately, everything above board, I gave him the exact mechanism he needed to start stealing other people's land. He used my deal as the proof of concept." Martha was quiet. "That's not the same as being responsible," she said after a moment. "It's not the same, but it's not nothing either." He looked at the road. "If I'd asked more questions, if I'd noticed what Mercer was doing, your husband might—" He stopped. "Cole, I'm not asking you to absolve me of it." "Good," she said, "because I'm not going to. Not because I blame you, I don't, but because that's not mine to give." She turned to look at him. "What you carry from Daniel's death, you work that out with yourself. Same as I'm doing. Same as James is doing. It doesn't change what you did at that auction yard. It doesn't change the letter you kept. It doesn't change any of what you've done since." Cole was silent for a long time. "You're harder to argue with than anyone I've ever met," he said finally. "Daniel said the same thing. He was right." Something shifted in the air between them, small and careful, like the first degree of warmth after a very long winter. Behind them, Sam said to Robert, "Are Cole and Mama going to get married?" Robert said Sam. "I'm just asking." "Don't just ask." "Why not?" "Because it's not your business." "It's a little bit my business. He'd be my—" "Sam." "I'm just saying." Cole's jaw moved in a way that was almost not quite, but almost a smile. Martha looked very deliberately at the horizon. They were 3 days back from the courthouse when James came to Cole. Martha saw it happen from the kitchen window, James walking across the yard toward the barn, where Cole was working his hands in his pockets, his shoulders carrying the particular set of a person who has decided to do a difficult thing and is getting it done before they lose their nerve. She didn't go out. This wasn't hers to be part of. She watched them through the glass. Cole came out of the barn when he heard James coming. They stood facing each other, and she couldn't hear anything. But she watched James talk for a long time, longer than she'd expected James, who used words like currency and spent them carefully, and Cole listened without moving. And then Cole said something, not much, maybe 2 sentences, and James nodded once and put out his hand. Cole shook it. They stood there for a moment longer, and then James turned and walked back, and Martha moved away from the window before he could catch her watching. He came through the kitchen door, and she was standing at the stove with her back to him. "You watched, didn't you?" he said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mama." She turned around. James's face was red along the jaw in the way it got when he was feeling something he considered private. "Are you all right?" she said. "Yeah." He cleared his throat. "I told him I didn't forgive him for not coming sooner. And I told him I respected him anyway, and I told him—" He stopped, swallowed. "I told him Pa would have liked him." Martha pressed her lips together. "That's a significant thing to say," she said. "I know." "Do you mean it?" "Yeah." He looked at the floor. "Yeah, I do." She crossed the kitchen and held her son's face in her hands, the same way she'd done 3 nights ago, and this time he didn't just let her. He leaned into it, just slightly. Just for a second, the way a boy does when he remembers that being a man doesn't mean being alone. The Reynolds land was returned on a Thursday. Martha drove out to see it with Cole beside her, and Clara between them, the same way they'd ridden that first night to the Crossfire Ranch. But the direction was different now, and everything felt different, and when the wagon turned up the familiar road, and she could see the property markers, she told Cole to stop. She got down. She walked to the edge of what had been her yard. The house was still standing. Nobody had damaged it. It had just been sitting empty and waiting, and she stood there for a long time. Cole didn't come after her. He seemed to understand, as he seemed to understand most things, that this was something she needed to do alone. She looked at the house, at the porch where she and Daniel had sat on summer evenings, at the window of what had been the children's room, at the garden she'd kept that had gone to seed in her absence. She thought about Daniel standing at the kitchen table the morning before he died, drinking his coffee, saying something ordinary about the fence line on the north pasture, and she had not known, how could she have known, that it was the last ordinary morning? That there would be no more ordinary mornings after it, only the terrible aftermath and the long climb back. "I won it back," she said to no one. To him, to the land. "I told you I would, and I did." The wind moved through the grass. She stood there until she was done standing there, and then she walked back to the wagon. "Well," Cole said. "It's mine," she said. "It'll always be mine." She climbed up. "But it's not home anymore." Cole looked at her. "No," he said. "No." She settled Clara on her lap and looked down the road. "Home is somewhere else now." Clara looked up at her. "The ranch?" "Yes, baby." "Good," Clara said. "Duke would miss me." Cole said nothing. But the set of his shoulders changed something, releasing in them, something that had been held carefully for a very long time. A week later, Catherine Hale came to the Crossfire Ranch. Martha hadn't expected her. She came alone in a plain carriage, dressed practically, and she knocked at the front door, and when Martha opened it, she said, "I know you didn't ask me here, and I won't stay long. I needed to see you." Martha stepped back from the door. They sat at the kitchen table, the two of them, and Catherine Hale held her cup in both hands, the way people do when they need something to hold, and she said, "My children came home when they heard what happened. My son, he's 24, he looked at me and he said, 'Why didn't you come to us sooner?' And I didn't have a good answer." She looked at Martha. How do you live with the things you should have done sooner and didn't?" Martha thought about this honestly. "You do the next thing," she said. "Whatever the next right thing is, you do it. And you don't stop." She paused. "You already did the hardest part. You stood up in that courtroom." "I should have stood up years ago." "Yes," Martha said simply. "But you stood up when it counted. That's not nothing." She looked at Catherine steadily. "What are you going to do now?" "My son wants me to come to San Antonio. He has a house there." She paused. "I think I'm going to go." "Good," Martha said. "Will you, if you need a witness for any of the other families' cases?" "I'll find you," Martha said. "And you'll come?" It wasn't a question. Catherine nodded. "I'll come." She left an hour later, and Martha stood at the door and watched the carriage go, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not quite compassion, not quite forgiveness, but something in that neighborhood. The recognition of a woman who had been trapped by different walls than Martha's, but walls nonetheless, and had finally found her way through them. Better late, she thought, than never finding the door at all. The evening that changed everything came 3 weeks later. The children were on the porch, Sam and Robert arguing about something with the cheerful intensity of boys who had recovered their capacity for ordinary arguments. Eliza, reading Anna braiding Clara's hair, while Clara told an elaborate story about something Duke had communicated to her that afternoon. The cicadas were loud across the fields, and the sky had gone the deep orange that Texas evenings do in late summer, the color that looks almost unreal. Martha was washing the supper dishes when she heard the back door and Cole came in from the barn. He stood in the kitchen doorway. "Can I talk to you?" he said. She dried her hands. They went out to the far end of the porch away from the children and stood at the railing, and Cole was quiet for long enough that Martha finally said, "Whatever it is, just say it." He turned to look at her. "I want you to stay," he said. "I want all of you to stay. Permanently." He paused. "Not as workers, not as guests, not as I want this to be your home, yours and the children's." Another pause. "And I want, if you'd allow it, I want to find out what we might be. You and me." Martha looked at him. "Cole Bennett," she said. "Are you asking me to stay because you feel responsible for what happened to my family?" "No." "Are you asking because Daniel asked you to look out for us?" "No." He met her eyes directly. "I'm asking because in the time you've been here, I've slept better, worked harder, laughed more than I have in 5 years, and the thought of this house going back to what it was before you came." He stopped. "I'm asking because I want you here, Martha. Not because of Daniel, not because of what happened, because of you." The porch was quiet except for the children and the cicadas and the last of the evening birds. Martha looked at this man, at the years in his face, the loss, the guilt he was still working through, the steadiness underneath all of it that had not wavered once from the moment he stepped forward in an auction yard and put everything he had on a table for strangers. She thought about who she had been 6 months ago standing in that yard with nothing, and who she was now. She thought about the women who grew up being told that strength and softness were opposites, and the long education of discovering they were not. She thought about Clara and Duke. She thought about Robert doing land record research at a kitchen table at midnight, because his father taught him that organized thinking wins arguments. She thought about James shaking Cole's hand in a yard one morning and saying what his father would have said. She said, "Ask me again in the spring." Cole looked at her. "In the spring," she said, "when we've done a full season together. When the children have had time and I've had time, and we know each other the way people should know each other before they make promises." She looked at him steadily. "But I'll tell you this now, I'm not going anywhere." Something moved across Cole Bennett's face. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened, not from squinting this time. "Spring it is," he said. Clara appeared between them from nowhere as Clara did. "Are you staying?" she asked Martha with the directness of someone who had heard enough to understand the shape of the question. "Yes," Martha said. "Good," Clara said. She patted Cole's arm. "Duke will be happy." Cole looked down at her. This time, the thing that moved across his face stayed there. The smile he'd been keeping so carefully controlled finally let loose, and it changed him entirely. Opened something in his face that had been closed for 5 years, and Martha saw in it the man he'd been before. Grief made him careful. "The spring came?" Cole asked. Martha said yes. Years passed the way years do when they are full quickly in memory, fully in the living of them. James grew into the rancher his father had been building him toward, with Cole's particular brand of steadiness added to the mix. Robert went to study law in Austin at 17, the youngest person in his program, and came back with a sharp mind and a sharper suit, and immediately started working on land restitution cases for families across 4 counties. Eliza taught school. Anna became a doctor, the first woman to practice medicine in Calhoun County, which did not happen without a fight, and which Eliza later said was not a surprise to anyone who had watched Anna tell Sam and Robert what to do since she was 11. Sam took to ranching the way the land took to water. And Clara, who had never once stopped talking to horses, opened a boarding stable at 22 that had a waiting list 6 months long. Martha Reynolds. Martha Bennett became the kind of woman that small Texas towns build legends around, not because of one dramatic thing, but because of the accumulation of 10,000 ordinary acts of steadiness and courage and refusal to apologize for taking up space in the world. The auction yard in Calhoun County was torn down in 1891. Nobody who had been there that July day ever entirely forgot what it looked like. A woman standing in the heat with her children pressed close and her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to break, while a crowd watched and a powerful man smiled. And nobody forgot what happened next. A man in a faded hat stepping out of the back of that crowd. A silence that spread like water. A price paid without hesitation for 7 people a town had decided were worth nothing. The story got told differently, depending on who was doing the telling. Some people said Cole Bennett was the hero of it. Some people said Martha Reynolds was. Some people said the real hero was a 13-year-old boy who organized evidence at a kitchen table in the middle of the night, and a 4-year-old girl who made a horse remember how to be touched. But the people who knew them, who had worked beside them, eaten at their table, watched their children grow. Watched 2 people who had each survived tremendous loss find in each other something they'd stopped believing was still possible. Those people knew the truth. There was no single hero. There was a family that had been broken apart and had refused with everything it had to stay broken. And that is how a widow who was mocked and sold at a summer auction became the heart of the most respected ranch in Texas, not by becoming someone different, not by shrinking herself to fit what the world expected, but by standing exactly as large as she was in exactly the place she chose to stand and not moving an inch. That is how a silent cowboy who had spent 5 years punishing himself for surviving finally learned the thing grief had been keeping from him, that loving another family was not a betrayal of the one he lost. It was the only answer that had ever made sense. And the land that had tried to break them both became the ground their children's children would stand on, solid and true, long after the names of the men who'd tried to steal it were forgotten entirely. Some things once earned cannot be taken back. Martha Reynolds Bennett knew that better than anyone alive, and she built her life on it one day, one choice, one child, one season at a time, until what had started as survival became something so much larger and brighter and more enduring that the word triumph was almost too small for it. It was home, and it was hers, and no one not ever again would take it from her.